Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tech Time Today. I'm your host, Jeff Welpley, and in this episode, we're going to be going over the results of the Angular Developer Survey from last year, this most recent year, that just came out a couple weeks ago. We're going to be looking at an article written by my good friend Minko Gechev that goes over some of the results and what Angular developers are saying. And I'm going to comment on my thoughts in addition to what Minko has to say. So thank you for tuning in. Make sure that you click the like button on this video, you subscribe, and if you have any of your thoughts on how Angular is doing in general, what the results of the survey are saying, and things that you think differently or would agree with, please comment in below the video. Thanks a lot, and let's get started. All right, so this is a article that Minko wrote in the beginning of this month, January, and it's a short read, so I'll link to it in the description. I would highly recommend you read it, but I'm going to kind of go through it, summarize it, give my thoughts. First of all, one thing that Minko talks about is all of the great stuff that they've added to Angular this past year, including, among other things, improving build speed up to 87%, which is crazy. It wasn't too bad before, but I can tell you, especially having a pretty robust, pretty large Angular app myself with server rendering, with a bunch of other stuff, it is pretty drastic, the changes that have been made for build time speed. And then they've added a bunch of awesome features for SSR that I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a couple minutes, as well as signals, which I hadn't really thought about a lot for this specific concept per se, but underlying thing that signals are addressing is reactivity within the framework. So reactivity is just something that all frameworks have to some degree, of how the UI changes in response to the underlying data changing. And there are a lot of different ways to do it. Angular has had different ways in the past. And this new concept that it isn't new in general. Other frameworks have used some signals concept before, and Angular has definitely borrowing from this sort of best practices from a lot of different areas. But it is new for Angular, and it is really great. About 12,000 people entered the survey, which is definitely significant, is a small fraction of the total Angular developers, but you're never going to get a majority of any community, regardless of what it is, to spend their time to enter a survey. Even though I did the survey just like I do all of the different surveys, and they did make this one pretty streamlined. So in the future, when this comes up, I would highly recommend, if you do use Angular, that you enter the survey. It definitely helps the team a lot in understanding what the community is thinking and what direction they should take. This was actually, I thought, pretty interesting that 96% of the respondents have started to use the latest standalone APIs. And I definitely do not think this means that they are exclusively using, that almost everyone is using the standalone APIs exclusively. ng modules is definitely not dead already, but it does mean that this is an extremely useful feature that is, clearly, by the amount of almost immediate adoption, it sort of gives the impression that it is an improvement over ng modules. And I would agree with that. I don't have ng modules completely removed and have everything as standalone components, but I have, as I've been able to make changes, started to make it in different areas, and it definitely makes the components more isolated, easier to test, easier to refactor, etc. So a lot of benefits from that. And then 26% of respondents, already started to use signals, which is actually a pretty decent number for something that's, for a lot of people in the Angular community, is a brand new concept. So very cool. And then Minko doesn't explicitly mention this in the text here, but in the graph mentions that 13% of the respondents started to use hydration. And I think that's a reflection of, more so, that it's only a fraction of the overall Angular community that utilize server-side rendering. I would guess, I don't know this for a fact, but I would guess that of the people that use server-side rendering, a large majority of them have already started to try to utilize the hydration features and other SSR related improvements that have been coming out, and they've been great. It's definitely going in the right direction. This chart is super interesting. This is something that it has some of the things that I just mentioned, but it sort of tries to highlight what are the strengths of Angular and then where are the areas where it still needs to improve. A lot of people love dependency injection with Angular, which is something that I think is utilized in a couple other frameworks, but not all of them. So like, I feel like a lot of the core foundation traditionally of Angular are with kind of enterprise developers who have used dependency injection with other technologies like Java and other things like that. And that isn't everybody, but there's definitely not everybody likes dependency injection as an abstraction, but Angular has done a very good job of utilizing that. So if you like that, you probably like Angular. Runtime performance, of course. Angular has just continues to improve things when it comes to performance. This thing, keeping up with Angular releases, I think Minko talks about this a little bit later in the text as well of this article. Angular has done such a good job. In fact, I would say it's one of the core things now in the current form of Angular of keeping it stable, of having these releases where sometimes it's implementing really big new features, but Angular is still stable and it doesn't break all your code. That's like been front of mind for the Angular team. And it's something that I think the people in the Angular community for sure appreciate. And myself, I can't even remember the last time that I can't remember the last time that I did an Angular upgrade and it broke everything. And it was all the way back when going from AngularJS to Angular, which it really is two completely different frameworks in a lot of senses, in pretty much most senses. After that, it may be actually a first few versions, there was a couple small things, but pretty quickly they stabilized things. And after that, it was just super, super easy to make upgrades. And on the other end, the things that that they still have to work on. I mean, they mentioned debugging and profiling. I think that's has improved a lot the past couple of years. There's a lot of Angular dev tools and that type of thing, but I suppose there's always improvements you can make there. But server-side rendering is very important to me, and because I utilize it for my work app, it is something that Angular has been behind other frameworks on in the past, but they are definitely starting to catch up. Like a lot of the improvements this past year have been substantial, definitely going in the right direction. And then the other big thing that Minko talks about is the new website angular.dev, which not only aims to improve just documentation and learning and teaching Angular to people, but also kind of being interactive, being able to have people test out code, get started very easily, lower the bar of trying to learn how Angular works, both overall and different features and that type of thing. So they definitely have big aspirations with Angular Dev in the future, Angular Dev, and that I think is going to be something that the community is definitely going to really love in the future. And then talked about that for the past few months, they've trained 70,000 new developers in Angular, talking about later on here in the article that increasing the initial load time, like I mentioned, all the improvements with server-side rendering. It's been great. And then they mentioned here, one of the new features for deferrable views, which helps with server-side rendering, but actually, even if you don't use server-side rendering, even if you have a client-only app, deferrable views can just be a huge thing for performance, that it allows you to break up your app in ways other than just traditionally you can break up your app by route and have different parts of your app lazy loaded and built into separate components and lazy loaded based off of the route. But with deferrable views, you can do it not just off the route, but even different parts of a particular view. So an individual component, for example. And so this gives the developer a lot more flexibility in how they optimize their application. There's just like a lot of stuff. And when it comes to SSR, there's a lot of stuff that we can build on top of this feature in the future. Component authoring has definitely been a big focus of the team. Obviously with the standalone component API has helped, and I believe they have a lot of other stuff planned along these lines. Actually, Minko refers to it as the Angular Renaissance, and I agree, because I do think that maybe it's just been in perception for people who don't use Angular on a regular basis, but there definitely has been, sort of negative perception at certain times over the past 10 years, past decade, of Angular compared to like something like React, where React has been like the super sexy framework. Like you're not cool, at a startup if you're not using React, and Angular isn't cool enough. All of the great work that the Angular core team has been doing, all of the great work that the community has been doing, which has been pretty consistently happening, has started to, I think, be noticed by the outside world. And that is great. I just, especially with a lot of the meetups that I go to now, a lot of the people I talk to, you could just tell that Angular is getting a lot of newfound respect. And that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed my summarization of Minko's article and talking about the Angular survey results. Again, really encourage you to read the article. Encourage you to if you are already an Angular developer, learn about some of these new features. If you are not currently using Angular, maybe it's time to dive back in, because it is truly the Angular Renaissance. Thank you for listening, and look forward to seeing you guys again next time on Tech Time Today.